Hey, welcome to an AMA Ask Me Anything podcast. We got a few questions from you guys, and we're going to do our best to answer them in a somewhat good way. Before we get started, a couple friends of the show, I want you guys to go check out. Go to your Google search bar, your social media channels, whatever. Enter Landers KTM. Go check them out, particularly if you're a GNCC, National Enduro, Sprint Enduro, Hard Enduro type rider, racer that needs some support, especially trackside support. Check them out. They have a spot in Monterey, Tennessee. They also attend all the GNCCs, so they are there to help you. Good family owned business, small town. Check them out. Racing runs through their blood. The other, you'll see the hats, carry resources. Check them out. Again, same social media channels, Google search bar, whatever it is. Punch in, learn a little bit about them. Maybe they have something you need and they'll help you out. So, soft sell there. I'm not going to get into hard sell, but Google them. If they can help you, I'm sure that they will. So, we kind of sent out some questions through the social channels, got back some questions, and we're going to dive into them, answer them the best we can, or a version of the best that we can. Um, One question we got in was, what are my training zones and how do I set them? This is a really big question. And when this came in, I also was talking with my buddies over at CycleSmart. CycleSmart is a coaching company that specializes more in cycling. And this question came in from somebody that rides dirt bikes, but there is a lot of crossover in how you set your zones. And what I want to tell you is that in CycleSmart, my buddies and I, we're going to dive into this in a very deep, comprehensive way here in a couple weeks. So once we do that, I will share that podcast with you guys, make sure it's in the right channel so you can see it. We're going to get into a lot of depth about FTP, metabolic zones, really deep dive into that and why we don't necessarily use or why we don't use FTP, particularly in a world right now when everybody is using FTP and the flawed concept of FTP and what we do for zones, why we use CP, why we use respiratory rate, things like that. But I want to answer this question in more of a dirt bike capacity, more of a broad stroke macro level. It's funny. Also, Russell Bobbitt, friend of the show, who stay tuned, he will pop in on a podcast here in a couple weeks too. He actually called me and asked me kind of a similar question that we're going to get into here in a couple weeks too about training zones and metabolic rate of all of that and tying all those things together. So we're going to get into that more detailed, but I think, or I'll know that you can get a long way down the road by just doing some simple calculations, some simple just testing, and some simple awareness of kind of what's going on, particularly like whenever you're looking at your moto zones and then also having cycling, rowing, swimming, yada, 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 as cross training methods. Um, so first, like from a moto standpoint, we if moto is your main thing, and when I say moto, I'm kind of generalizing woods and moto and everything. As long as you're on a dirt bike, we'll say. So assuming like that's your main thing, like that the main thing is the main thing. So in dirt bike racing, we train more in a in some sort of a hybrid polarized method, and meaning that because there's an intersection of skills and intensity, the moto days are super intense, need to have high heart rate, high respiratory rate, and then the days that you're doing that aren't on the dirt bike need to be more quote unquote zone two based, lower intensity. Um, Now within that though, you need to establish zones for running, for rowing, for cycling, for swimming, anything that you're going to do outside, right? And your running zones are going to be different from your cycling zones, and so on and so forth, just due to efficiency. Some people are good runners, some are horrible runners. You're using more muscle groups, running versus cycling versus swimming versus rowing, right? I think those things are pretty clear to a lot of people. Um, so generally where I start is with a longer moto, and depending on what which discipline of moto you're doing, that could be 45, 50, 60 minute moto, but it's a longer moto, right? And from there we look at average heart rate. I mean, it's similar to looking at MLSS, maximal lactate steady state. Like if you're doing a long cycling workout or a long run, like if you're a marathon runner or triathlete or cyclist or whatever. But what's different is with moto, that's essentially a variable paced lactate threshold effort. But within there, though, you can look and kind of get an idea, pretty clear idea of what your lactate threshold heart rate is. So while a lot of people will take that lactate threshold heart rate and derive percentages of that, and that's not a horrible way to go, but it is a lot of assumption that goes in with that. And it doesn't always cross over specifically or appropriately with zone one, zone two, zone three, so on and so forth. But it gets you in the ballpark, right? If you're and this answer is kind of geared toward, hey, if you're doing this on your own, like this gets you started, right? So like that's a good place to start. And that gives you sort of like where your racing heart rate will be kind of sort of ish, right? And so from there, um, we can um, get an idea of like what that intensity is, or you're doing this on your own, right? And you can establish that your heart rate is at a high level. It is hard to maintain this, yada, 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 right? Um, and so then there's also the assumption that you're riding your dirt bike once, two, three times, maybe four times a week. So if that's the case, that's all the intensity that you really need to be doing for that block, for that week. And then where we go with that is when we start looking at running, rowing, etc. We can really base that off of perceived exertion and respiratory rate, right? Like if you can talk while you're doing something, that's generally where you need to be whenever you're doing the other type of cardio. If you can not talk, you're probably going too hard because now you have too many intense days throughout the week. So I'm getting a little off track there because the question is, what are my training zones and how do I set them? Um, but I think it's important to realize, like, generally when people ask that question, they tend to be training too intense too frequently. So, um, so basically, you're taking your maximal, you're taking your average heart rate off of a long moto. Those are your moto heart rates, um, based off of your lactate threshold, taking certain percentages of that. Um, However, you don't really ever go out and ride dirt bike at 80, 85, 90% effort. Anytime you're riding your dirt bike, it should be 100, 110% effort. So you're looking at your heart rate from that moto and you're trying to meet or exceed that every time you do a moto. So that is your threshold, essentially, quote unquote. Then when you go to off the bike stuff, you need to be at conversation pace, zone two, below that. So you're going to take, um, it's going to be a good, a good bit lower. It's hard to answer, uh, broad questions in a very specific way. But let's just say that if you are, 100% on moto day, all your other cardio training needs to be at 60, 80%, right? So just kind of do that math if you can, if you will. But then also chin check that and see if I am doing a pedal, can I be having a conversation through the entirety of that pedal? Can I be having a conversation through the entirety of that run? Now, there are certain circumstances where we would interject intensity, specific intensity on a row, a pedal. Those are primarily if you're coming back from injury, like say you have a shoulder injury, you can't ride your dirt bike. but you need to do some higher intensity workouts to get ready for a race to kind of keep yourself engaged. You end up in a period of it's raining a lot. You can't get on the dirt bike, but you need to have some intensity in your program. Where does that intensity need to be? Where does it need to come from? So in that case, when we look at running, rowing, cycling, swimming, we do need to establish heart rate zones. And essentially, the easiest, quickest way to do that, it's not foolproof, but again, you're doing this on your own without a trainer. So basically, like, go run 20 minutes. What's your average heart rate? Go cycle, go do a test as hard as you can. When I say run 20 minutes, as hard as you can, 20 minutes. Go cycle, warm up as hard as you can, 20 minutes. It's a good place to start. Get your threshold off of that, and then we can establish your zones based off of 60, 80, whatever percent. Not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. You know, start there, start with this, and then look for the follow up podcast to this with my buddies at Cycle Smart, where we dive in even deeper. And if you want to get super granular with testing and how all of that works. But for on the slide, like, you need a quick, dirty test to get you in the ballpark to kind of help you along the way. That's the direction to go. And, but just kind of remember, like, when you are training, particularly for dirt bike racing, it needs to be high intensity on the dirt bike. Everything else is lower intensity, longer in duration. Again, with the exception of you're missing dirt bike time, so you have to find some intensity elsewhere. Next question. What should I eat on race day? Um, I get this question a lot. This is probably the most asked question. People just randomly, hey, what should I eat? What should I eat on race day? And it's kind of funny. It's basically what do you eat on a normal day? I think it's really great that you have a race day and it means something. You're super focused on it. It seems like an event. You have some anxiety around, like, all those things are great. It should be special. It should be something you're looking forward to. It should hold a higher value than a Wednesday. However, if you are an athlete going to a race to try to perform, you should have a routine of good hydration, good nutrition every day of the week. Now, for sure, you're going to have days where you slack and you should, where you overeat or you eat pizza or you have this, you have that. But by and large, you should be eating in a pretty healthy way. So when you get to race day, um, it's basically about being on point. And if you haven't gotten to the point yet where you even know we should be on Wednesday, then you need to drill down deeper and you pick up the phone, call me, or speak with a nutritionist or whatever. But I will say, I will give you a little bit of a generalization of what you should be eating. Um, you should be careful with the amount of fiber that you're eating. You should be careful with the amount of fat that you're eating, like particularly like bacon, right? Like, we should probably skip bacon on race day. You should scale back on like red meats, things like that, race day, a couple of days before. And when you get to race day, um, again, let me back up. This question comes from somebody that's doing a 2 hour GNCC race. So high intensity, 2 hours is going to be, almost exclusively carbohydrate based fueling for this event. So you're going to want to eat very simple, very bland, like a picky 8-year old, right? You're going to be looking at, um, morning stuff. You're going to be looking at, simple carbohydrates with some complex carbohydrates and some protein. This person races at 10 a.m., so you're probably going to have one meal, and that's going to be waffles, toast, pancakes, oatmeal, maybe oatmeal. Oatmeal can be a little high in fiber, a little hard to take down sometimes. Something in like the carbohydrate realm there, and then some proteins like and then also like some fruit, not fruit that's like hard to digest or high in fiber or high in acid. Probably leave out apples, oranges, things like that. Probably include more water rich fruits and bananas, things along those lines. Eggs are fine. Some people handle eggs better than others, so you should know that about yourself before just decide to have eggs on race day. Um, but something along those lines is kind of where you need to go. One of the bigger questions, though, that kind of goes in with that, and this question wasn't asked, but hydration is right there, 1A, 1B with nutrition. So you really need to pay attention to, the hydration that you have leading into the race and the hydration of race day. And you need to have a good relationship or a good ratio, we'll say, between fluids with electrolytes and just straight water, right? You need to be having those in the run up to the event, and being on point with your protocol throughout the week is really important too for your hydration. If you don't know what that protocol is, there are a couple quick formulas. Um, Body weight plays into that. Environmental factors play into that. You can just DM me and I can give you quick calculations and try to figure out how much fluids you should have during a week and what the ratio of fluids to electrolytes to carbohydrates needs to be there. Um, but yeah, what you eat on race day should really mirror what you're eating on a hard workout day. And you're going to, in today's world, we're pretty familiar with percentages of macros. So you're going to look at probably 70% carbohydrates on that like race day morning. If you're doing the afternoon race, you're probably going to slide some snacks in there, probably get a breakfast and a lunch in there, and then maybe some snacks. And your lunch is going to look, so your breakfast is going to kind of be the same. Your lunch is going to look more like rice, sweet potatoes, maybe some chicken, stuff along that. But again, you're holding true to that distribution of macros in that like 70% or so range um, for that longer afternoon race. Um, so next question. How do I stop being nervous on the start line? Yeah, beats me, man. This comes from somebody that is racing the 8 a.m. youth race. So, um, what I would say to that first is like nerves are okay. We really tend to have a negative relationship with being nervous. Um, but it's okay. It's okay to be nervous. And if you're not nervous, well, let's say it's okay to be nervous, and then you've made a mistake if you're nervous. So let me practice my political speak here. Um, you can be nervous because you're not prepared and you know it deep down. You can also be or think that you're nervous just because you have anxiety around the race. So there are two different things. Having a little bit of appropriate anxiety or arousal around the race is completely appropriate, and you should. You should be excited. You should be nervous. You should have some anxiety around the race. They shouldn't. And actually, if you have like no anxiety or no arousal, you shouldn't be there. And if you have way, way, way too much arousal, you shouldn't be there either. You should be right there kind of in the middle. Like a good, just, yeah, I'm a little bit anxious. I'm a little bit uncertain about this thing or that thing. That's good. If you're sitting there on the start line, you're like, oh crap, what have I got myself into? Well, then you're just not prepared. So when I look at preparation for a race, it's a lot of things kind of go into that. And I think the best way to not be like nervous on the start line is to be able to pinpoint and say, I'm ready for this thing. And so being prepared is good. Um, and there are things you can do to be prepared. You can eat well. You can hydrate appropriately. You can do course recon. You can make sure your bike's ready to go. You can eliminate all these things that would make you nervous or give you anxiety. And so then when you're at the start line, it's like, oh, well, why am I nervous? What is the why of this nerve I'm having? And if you can pinpoint that, then you can address that. I'm nervous because I don't know that I can ride as hard as I need to for an hour and a half. Okay, well, go get prepared. Train appropriately. I'm nervous because my bike is not up to snuff. Okay, get your bike ready or know how to ride and take care of your bike. I'm nervous because of course conditions. Okay, Well, is it muddy? Is it whatever? Then when you get the opportunity to go home, practice in the mud. People all the time say to me, how do I get to be a better mud rider? Ride in the mud. Like there's nothing better than riding in the mud to be a better mud rider. So pinpoint what makes you nervous and then go address that and add that to your whole repertoire of being prepared for race day and you'll be good to go. Next question I have is from my buddy Jack. He's being a little bit of a jackass, and he's asking me, how do you incorporate Jimmy John's into a training program? And I know he's kidding. I know he's giving me a hard time because we had lunch the other day and I ordered just Jimmy John's. Um, and he's also giving me crap because I'm supposed to be healthy, but I'm eating Jimmy John's. But I think it is kind of an important context here is in that um, sometimes you just got to do the best you can in the moment. And we would all like to think that we have perfectly prepped meals and we're eating super clean all the time and yada, yada, yada. And like that's just not the case. Eating Jimmy John's 8 lunches a week is not the answer. But, sometimes and this particularly goes to like the segment of people that are busy and are training are trying to fit in training to their busy life. And sometimes you just got to do the best you can. And then you got to let yourself off the hook. It's like, we're not perfect. There's no perfect situation. And, sometimes you're just sometimes you're just running out of time. And as crazy as that sounds, but I think people will feel that. And in those situations, you look for the best option that you can pull off at that time. So I kind of gave you an example. It's like I was speaking with one of my athletes today, and I kind of like I'm not a big record what you eat every day kind of guy, kind of coach, kind of trainer. But I think it is important to kind of audit what you're eating from time to time. I think it's good to have that chin check. It's good to learn that about your athlete. It's good to learn that about yourself, and it's good to see primarily what you can eat more of, right? But and those are really important things to go through as an athlete to just kind of see where you are, where you can do better. We're really good at looking at heart rate data, power, output, all these things. Sometimes we don't really want to be honest about what we're eating and when we're eating it. I mean, sometimes more importantly, when we're eating it. So um, that being said, sometimes we just got to be normal. We like Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's is good. Better than Wendy's, right? So, just keep that in mind. Sometimes, um, and I kind of want everybody to do the best that they can. And I don't want to let anybody off the hook, but sometimes you just got to be normal. You can't always be on the throttle all the time. So that's my little spiel for you, Jack. Um, Next question. How much should I train? I'm a morning racer, 10 a.m., looking to move to the afternoon. I have a full-time job with a kid and another kid on the way. Um, man, my answer to that is stop training, start sleeping. You're going to need it. But, in all seriousness though, how much should you train really hinges on how much you can recover. And typically people come to the conversation, they're super motivated, hyper focused on can I train, can I train, can I train? And yeah, you absolutely can. You can train yourself right into the ground. But the answer is honestly, you can only train as much as you can recover from that. And the that in that is kind of wrapped around intensity, it's wrapped around duration, and it's wrapped around available bandwidth. Stress is stress is stress is stress. So while we tend to think of training stress as good stress, it pretty much is until it's not. So if you're working full time, you have one kid, another kid on the way, you need to put energy into maintaining, a healthy relationship, marriage. And that's not to be like a negative connotation. Oh, you got to really work on your marriage. Like, no, no, no. Like, to be in a responsible adult relationship, like friendship or otherwise, like you have to put energy into it at some point, right? In some level. So, what you really have to do is you really have to be honest with yourself on how much bandwidth you have to put into developing this skill, developing this craft, kind of what you need to improve. And then you need to be really clear about how much time you have to recover and how much time you can carve out to focus on the other thing. Once you get there, then I would really encourage you to, it sounds like you're a busy person, to maybe invest in trying out some wearable technologies, Apple Watch, Oura Ring, Whoop, Garmin, etc. If you're training, you probably should have at least an Apple Watch, preferably a Garmin, a Wahoo, something like that. A lot of those have sleep tracking metrics in them, and don't necessarily always rely on looking at your recovery score, but being familiar with resting heart rate, HRV, sleep cycles, things like that. So that when you wake up in the morning, you first and primarily self assess, how do I feel? And then maybe you wait an hour or two before you actually look at what the wearable technologies are reporting back to you. Don't lead with the wearable technologies, lead with how I feel, use the wearables to sort of integrate into your perception of yourself, and then move forward from there. It's not always possible, particularly if you're having to train early in the morning, but being aware of recovery, right? Let's just start there. Being aware of recovery is a critical place to start. From there, the next thing, I know I haven't even got to how the quote unquote how much, but from there, the consistency is key. Consistency is everything. And that consistency is very specific to you. So your consistency might be Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday. Maybe that's your consistency. Those are the days that you've identified where you can get in X amount of time. And I'm not even going to put a time frame reference out there because if it's 10 minutes that you can consistently do, amazing. If it's 3 hours, amazing. It's whatever your consistency is. The consistency is paramount to everything. You're way better off a few minutes these days a week than overshooting one day and then not getting back to it for a week or two or whatever, right? So, um, so that's huge. Figuring out how you can be consistent, um, figuring out how you can recover, how you can take days off, figuring out how you can take care of your body. And that's where a lot of people really mess up is they carve out and they say, or they say and they carve out, okay, cool. Like I can train 1 hour, 7 days a week. Well, that's great, but are you taking care of your body? Are you stretching? Are you foam rolling? Are you, whatever, cold plunging, whatever that recovery modality is? You've got to work in the recovery aspect of things because if you're not recovering, again, like you're you're going you're not going to be consistent. So with this person, full-time job, couple kids on the way, I'm going to look to train 3, 4, 5 days a week max. I'm going to take a couple of days like completely off. Maybe on those completely off days, you're watching Seinfeld reruns. Um, Kind of dated myself there. I only watch Seinfeld. There's nothing else worth watching. Seinfeld, that's it. But if you're watching a TV show and you're laying on the floor, you're foam rolling. That's your workout for the day. That's it. My good friend Kristen Kimes, she coined the phrase, I think she calls it restorative training. Sometimes we need to feel like we are doing something. These are my words, not hers, but sometimes we feel like we need to be doing something. And so if we can reframe our perspective to I'm foam rolling. This is my training for the day. Then that's great. That's your training for the day. You're restoring your body so you can get at it the next day. Um, so um, consistency is key. Consistency is key. Consistency is key. From there, you kind of back up and you say, okay, what am I trying to get better at? This comes from a dirt bike racer. So then you need to really prioritize getting on your dirt bike 1 or 2 days a week. So there's going to be 2 hours. Um, Everything after that is sort of bonus. And then you kind of pick the modes that are most efficient and effective for you. A lot of times we look at these races and say like, oh man, I need to be doing a 2 hour pedal 3 days a week. Well, you don't have time to do that. So if we go all the way back to like the first question of this podcast and like, what are my training zones? Then maybe you need to consult with somebody and say, well, I'm not getting enough intensity in for my goals. So like, where does that and what is that mode that needs to happen? Is that doing intervals in the rower, or do you actually look and say like, well, based on my recovery um, that I'm able to get, based on the amount of dirt bikes time I'm able to get, would I be better off just doing like a zone two, 30, 40, 45 minute run, something along those lines. So consistency is key. If you can figure out 3, 4, 5 days a week, ride your dirt bike a couple times, get in the gym a couple times, maybe 1 or 2 times, you can do a lot of gym stuff at home. Sometimes it's better for people to go actually like physically go to the gym just because it gives them a little bit of a goal and accountability and a deadline. That's great. If you don't have time for that, you can do a lot with uh, jump squats and walking lunges and push ups and pull ups. You can do a lot with that. So, um, yeah, how much should you train? As much as you can recover from. And that's probably going to be, with this schedule, probably max 7 to 9 hours a week, max, I'm guessing. So, but you really got to pay attention to the stress that or we'll say the load, the tax that gets put on your nervous system. And that's from work stress, life stress, training stress, the stress of feeling like I have to go train. Those are all real taxes and workloads that you have to pay a lot of attention to. And that's where I think wearables can be advantageous. Again, not an absolute, but it really tunes you into what recovery looks like and that there is a methodology to recovery. And then you'll start to see that hydration plays a part in that. Sleep routine has a role in that. Getting sunlight on your skin and your eyeballs early plays something into that. Um, yeah. So how much should you train? As much as you can recover from. Long answer. What the kids say, too long, didn't read. That's basically it. As much as you can recover from. So, next question is geared towards, this is from uh, a NICA. Those that don't know NICA, it's like National Interscholastic Cycling Association, from a NICA coach. How do I, uh, let me paraphrase, how do I intersect skills with training? And this age group that they're training is like the varsity level, like the probably 16, 17-year-old kids, young adults. Um, how do I intersect skills and training? Um, yeah, I mean that's a good question because at that point there's some assumptions that can be made that a lot of the setting up cones and riding around them, setting up stakes and riding around them, kind of practicing turns is probably beneath what their skill set is. And so I think there are a couple. I'm just going to drop like two things that I've recommended before and I've seen be effective. And I say two things, so I'll probably just keep talking forever, like 10 things. But the one thing is, uh, if they are training, one, to make sure that they're training in the right way for the right intents and purposes. And so what I see a lot of times, or what I see as being effective a lot of times is if a young adult wants to actually train, wants to actually do intervals, and is actually good for them, and there's a lot of like um, assumptions made there. One of the best ways to do it is to simply ride up a hill hard and like bomb a downhill, ride up a hill hard and bomb a downhill. And I think it's important at that age range that you're focusing more on perceived exertion, perception of perceived exertion, and respiratory rate rather than what is your power output, what is your heart rate response. It's important for all of us, but particularly young racers, to start to self-identify how hard is hard, what is it to suffer, and how long can you go hard? And then how do you handle fatigue? So you're really learning a lot more about yourself than just what the heart rate response or power output is. You're learning how your body is taking on fatigue and stress and going hard when you don't necessarily want to, and then how you're still driving your bike. And I should back up and say NICA is, as far as I know, it's only mountain biking. And feel free to correct me if they've branched into cyclocross or road cycling. Um, so keeping it introspective, keeping it fun, and keeping it applicable, I think is critical. And when I look at least the young adults, the kids that I know, they're really interested in sending it, quote unquote, and jumping and dive bombing and all these things. And so I think if you say, hey, like we're going to do this ride and we're just going to ride up hills as hard as you can, whatever your heart is, ride up the hill. Then when you get there, we're going to bomb the downhill. I think that's a great way to go. Um, I think that's a great way to work on skills, to get kids doing quote unquote intervals. And I think it's important, again, I really want to drive this home that these kids don't need to be looking as they're going up this hill, they don't need to be staring at their heart rate and they don't need to be staring at their power output. They simply need to be working on, how is my breathing? How is my form? And where is the freaking top of the hill? Like that's perfect. Um, Outside of that, one thing I think is really important or can be important is to kind of just work on the timing and the application of brakes. I want to sound like an old guy here, but with disc brakes, I mean, disc brakes are freaking awesome. Like, don't get me wrong, but we've turned into this like segment of the sport where we just rush into turns, grab the brakes, kind of maybe do the turn correctly, and then we have to sprint out of the turn. And sometimes you need to do that in racing. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. You got to protect your space. But I like to be able to set up a course where these kids can challenge themselves to not break, to work on being smooth. And as they do that, then they can gradually raise the speed and kind of find the limits of what their skill is and then try to enhance their skill and go faster. Um, and with that type of workout, you're not necessarily looking at like, oh, this is a quote unquote VO2 max or threshold or whatever. You're probably going to get into some zone two, I mean, some zone three, maybe some zone four work, but you're not going to, it's not going to be super, super hard, but it is going to be really challenging and really fun because you get instant feedback. You see instantly where you lose momentum and instantly like where you've blown a turn. So those are two of the better ways, I think, of how you intersect trying to solicit a specific physiological response, i.e. training, with some skill work, some skill set work, without necessarily having the kid feel like they're doing a quote unquote training day. Now, there are certainly kids out there that want to do 2 by 20 threshold. Okay, fine, go for it. But I think it's important to really make sure that you know that the kid knows what they're really signing up for before they start doing that type of work. And, you know, let them be kids riding bikes as long as they can be kids riding bikes. So that's kind of my take on where you intersect those things. Um, so that's it. That's it for this edition of Ask Me Anything. And if anything has sparked something in you or you want more information about that, send me a message and I'll do my best to answer you in a timely and uh, comprehensive fashion. And then, like I said, those we're going to dive in with my buddies at Cycle Smart into the zones and how to set them and all of that stuff way more in depth than what I did here. I wanted to kind of just get you some ballparks, let you start trying to figure this stuff out, get you um, comfortable with perceived exertion, respiratory rate. This is hard. This isn't hard. Paying attention to conversation rate, all that kind of stuff. So feel free to keep sending questions, even if I'm not advertising, quote unquote advertising, or reaching out that I'm doing an AMA. I'll compile these questions, answer them in the next podcast. And yeah, thanks for listening.